We are a little sparse this morning. If you guys get cold, you might want to huddle up a little bit closer together. I don't know, but glad to see the ones who did make it out today. I kind of figured we'd be a little bit thin today with the weather. I'm glad to see you did make it. Roads aren't too awful bad. They might be sketchy in places, so be careful. But we're glad to see you out today. We're in Exodus chapter 7. We left off at verse 6. If you'd like to open your Bibles to that passage, that's where we'll begin our study. Exodus chapter 7, verse 6. If you would please bow your heads, we'll go to God in a word of opening prayer. Our Father God in heaven, we thank you for this beautiful day and for the opportunity we have to come together and study from your word. We are thankful for those who are able to make it out in this inclement weather. And for those who are shut in at home, we certainly understand their reasons. Many times they are sick. Many times they're just simply unable to be out in this weather. And we hope and pray that you would strengthen and encourage them, and that those who are sick would be restored to the portion of health they need and desire. We ask that you will forgive us of our wrongs. We know we commit sins. We know we do things that are contrary to your will. We're so thankful that you sent your Son to die on our behalf, that we might be able to repent of those wrongs and find that forgiveness and have that hope of eternal life. We ask that you bless us in this time of Bible study that we have set aside. Help us to glean from your word the things we stand in need of. We might live a better life here below in service to you. And we're so thankful we're able to come together without fear. We hope and pray that such will continue for many years to come. We ask that you bless us as we go throughout the remaining events of today and the worship service, and that you would give us a safe journey in inclement weather to be able to return here this evening as well. Forgive us of our wrongs and bless us in life, save us in death. For this is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, we talked a little bit about the genealogy of Moses and Aaron and how they came to be descended. And then he kind of picks up the narrative again in chapter 7, tells them to go to Pharaoh. So we just kind of had a little bit of break in the story. Moses and Aaron did as the Lord commanded them, so did they. They listened to what God said and they obeyed him. That's such a key, isn't it? In every phase, as far as the whatever the dispensation is, whatever the covenant is, it always comes down to listening to what God says and then obeying his voice. And this is what Moses and Aaron did. And that's what's required of us today too. If God says to do so, we need to listen to his word and then obey it. And Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron 83 years old, when they spake unto Pharaoh. So 80 and 83. Remember, Aaron was the older brother of Moses, and Aaron was 3 years old. I don't know how old Miriam was. It may say somewhere in the text, but it's kind of slipping my mind. Miriam, of course, must have been a little older than 3 years old. Perhaps she's the oldest of all of the siblings here. She's not mentioned in the genealogy as a female, unfortunately, but that's probably a little bit older than Aaron was to be able to keep a watch over Moses when he was placed in the basket in the bulrushes in the Nile River. Okay, so 80 and 83. This is we would think about 80 and 83 as being pretty advanced in years, and it is. But at the same time, these people were living to be much older back then. Remember, Moses lived to be 120. We're going to find out that Levi, or we already did find out that Levi lived to be 137 years old. Amram also was 137 years old when he died. That's Moses' father. So Moses, at 120, was told that he could not enter the promised land. And it says, even though he was 120 years old, his eyesight wasn't dim and his natural strength wasn't abated. So that means he still had a measure of youth about him. He still was able to get around. Probably like most of us, as we get a little bit older, it's more difficult to get around, but as long as we're able to do so, we feel blessed. We feel that we're able to move around, to do whatever we can do. There might be a few creaks and a couple of noises that we hear, or it might be a little bit of pain that's involved with it, but we deal with that, don't we? Well, Moses was at that age, 120, probably would not have died except for the fact that it was time for Israel to enter into the promised land, and God had already said that Moses was not going to enter in. It was because of a sin that he committed, and I know he repented of that sin, but there was consequences for it. And of course, this was a part of God's plan as well, and that Moses died at age 120. Aaron died just a little bit before he did. So it's still, at 80 years old, seems like pretty advanced in years, doesn't it? And yet they did live to be just a bit older than what we live today, normally. Okay, and the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, When Pharaoh shall speak unto you, saying, Show a miracle for you, then you shall say unto Aaron, Take thy rod and cast it before Pharaoh, and it shall become a serpent. Just as Moses was told at the burning bush, and shown even at the burning bush, to cast down his rod and it becomes a serpent. The interesting thing about the word serpent, it comes from the word tannin in the Hebrew, and other people tried to take this and make it mean something else, but it really just simply means a beast that crawls on the ground, most likely a serpent, because of exactly the way Moses grabbing it by the tail and it becoming a rod again. It just, it's not a lizard. It's not some have even said some kind of a primate like a monkey or something like that. It wasn't that at all. Moses fled from before it, and he might have been startled at a monkey, but I don't think he would have fled before a monkey. But a snake, yes. A serpent's a little bit different. Has a different effect on us, doesn't it? Okay, so Moses and Aaron went into Pharaoh, and they did so as the Lord had commanded. And Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh and before his servants, and it became a serpent. Why was this necessary to do, to cast the rod down? Pharaoh must have asked for it. Why would that be necessary? Right. Miracles were done for a specific purpose. Now, I don't deny the fact that when Jesus performed healings, that it was out of compassion that he did so, because he cared for people. But the primary reason for the miracles still remains, even the healings, remains to confirm that word. And this is the same thing that's being done here. These miracles are being shown to Pharaoh so that Pharaoh can know that God means business, and he's really God, not just someone saying, God said for me to do this. And we say, well, how do I know that God really told you to do this? And how do I know that the God you're talking about is even real? You know, if somebody came up to you on the street today and said, well, God told me to do this, ask you for $100. God told me to ask you for $100. What's your reaction to that? Do you believe that? Not for a second. No. And there's a good reason. There's a good reason for us not to believe that. We don't live in that age anymore, do we? There's a good reason for that. Now, I might choose to help him out, but I'm not going to let him tell me how much I'm going to help him. All right? That kind of rubs me the wrong way. I get this. I don't know how you guys deal with this. This is how I deal with this. If I come to a cash register and someone says, would you like to round this up for this certain charity or that certain charity? How do you deal with that? You can say yes. Who does it belong to, and who has to say over where it goes? That's not being selfish. That's not being selfish. God himself said the laborer is worthy of his hire, is he not? So the wages that you're paid, whatever you receive, that belongs to you. You decide where it goes. And I just simply say, most of the time, no thank you. Without being mean, just no thank you. And someone says, well, you should still give. You should still. Well, I do. But I make the choice as to where and when I give and how much. So that's the first thing I'd have a problem with, is someone came up and said, God said, give me $100. Second of all, although I might choose to help them, I may choose a much lesser amount because of that. But do I believe that God told him to tell me this? Right, that's the point. There's no proof that God actually spoke to him and said that, is there? In fact, there's a lot of proof otherwise in the scriptures. All right. So as far as giving and helping somebody out for that particular reason, I don't put any stock in that. But if that person was able to do something miraculous, there was no denying that it was miraculous, that would be a different story. Again, I don't believe that's going to happen today because of what the scriptures teach. That age of miracles is gone. We don't any longer have it. God has revealed all he's going to reveal until he returns again, until Jesus comes back. That's it. We've got all that we need. And it's, all things that pertain unto life and godliness is here. And that was the reason for the miracles, right? To confirm the word. Now the word's here. It's been confirmed, so we just simply need to hear what it says. Well, they do. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I will never forget the old gentleman that came to me, and I was trying to talk to him about what to do to be saved, and he just told me at the time I was very young, and he said, "Young fella, it's coming when someone starts that way." "Young fella," he said, "I was praying one time in the church building, and I was praying really hard, and all of a sudden I looked up and the lights just glowed brighter, and I saw angels flying around the lights," and he said, "I knew at that moment I was saved." And you know what the next words were? "And you can't tell me I didn't see that." What are you going to do? I closed up my Bible and went home. There's not much else you can do. Well, if you want to study some more, let me know. But, I'm going by what this says. I wouldn't want to go on seeing something or, I don't know what happened. Well, I don't know what he saw. I'm not saying he didn't see something. Maybe the lights did look bright. Maybe he did see something going around the lights and he assumed it was an angel. It could have been the vitreous humor on the top of his eye detached a little bit too. I've had that happen. Right? When you get older, that happens sometimes. And you start seeing floaters. You start seeing things in your eyes. I think I'm okay. It's been checked out okay. It's just a normal aging thing, And I still see them sometimes. I don't see them right now, but I do see them sometimes, usually in the morning when I first wake up. But maybe he did see something, but I don't believe he actually saw angels. I don't believe he was saved at that moment. I don't read that in the scriptures. Do you? And that's what I tried to point out to him. We got to go by what this says, not by what we feel, not by what we think we see. I don't want to base my salvation on something as ethereal as that. I want to base it on rock solid foundation. Remember, that's what Jesus said. "Whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them shall be likened to a wise man that builds his house on the rock." That's where we want to be, on the rock, not on the sand. Not on the sand. Because it won't stand the test of time, will it? It won't stand the test of eternity either. So these miracles were done in order to confirm. So Pharaoh could know for sure that this is the real deal. This is authentic. This is coming from Jehovah God, the great I am. And again, it's all about his name too, isn't it? This is where he reveals his name. I am that I am. That means I always was, I am now, I always will be, and thou shalt have no other gods before me. Why? Because there are no other gods. That's the whole lesson of the book of Exodus. That's what it is. And even the Israelites that he's saving, even the Israelites, they have to be convinced of this over and over and over again. Okay? So this miracle of the rod to the serpent was meant to impress Pharaoh that this isn't just an off-the-wall request made by a couple of guys who are claiming to be something they're really not. They're claiming to be prophets speaking for God. They actually were. They actually were speaking for God because this miracle proved it. Then Pharaoh also called the wise men and the sorcerers, now the magicians of Egypt. They also did in like manner with their enchantments, for they cast down every man his rod, and they became serpents. Now what? Did they actually do this? Was it a trick? I'm giving you that academic answer again. I don't know. Maybe through some demonic power even they were able to do something. We don't know. Somehow or another they were able to reproduce the effect of casting down a rod and it becoming a serpent. My gut feeling is some kind of trick. David Copperfield used to do that kind of stuff too, all right? But he would even be the first to admit it's not real magic. The magic is that you can't really know how it's done, so it looks magic to you, but it's really an illusion. Okay, I've seen him make the Statue of Liberty disappear. A jet airliner, an elephant, I've seen him do that. Okay, how did he do that? I don't know. That's what makes it magic, right? But it really isn't magic. It's an illusion. Mirrors, I don't know. Whatever he did to do that, he made it look real. Made it look very real. That's my gut feeling about this. But who knows? Maybe demonic forces were involved in it as well. Right, and that's a good point. Why were the demons allowed to possess people in the first century? And by the way, there's no proof that the demons still operate in that way today. As a matter of fact, the scriptures teach that he would cause the evil spirits to cease from the land. Now, whether that was just once or twice or for all time, it seems to be the impression to me on that seems to be, according to the book of Amos, that when he came, he would banish them from the land forever. And that would be it. And Jesus had the power to do that. Why did he allow the demons? Why did God allow that? So that Jesus could display his power over it. And God's going to display his power over this too, isn't he? What happened to their snakes? Look at the rest of that verse. Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods. All right, so obviously, this was not just a trick produced by Moses and Aaron. Not only were they able to cast their rod down and it become a serpent, it was able to also devour the magician's serpents that they cast down. God's serpent was able to devour them all, and that was done. Who's superior? Obviously, God is superior. And he hardened Pharaoh's heart, that he hearkened not unto them, as the Lord had said. Again, there's a lot of back and forth on this. All right, who actually did it? Did Pharaoh harden his own heart? Did God harden his heart? Well, a little bit of both. As long as you understand that it is Pharaoh's choice. What I really believe happens here is God knew. He foreknew that Pharaoh's heart was so hard that he said, I will harden his heart by what I make, the request that I make. Let my people go. And he's going to resist that. He's going to fight that tooth and nail all the way through. And God said, I know he's going to. That's okay, because I'm going to prove my power. And he is. Over 10 plagues, he's going to do that. So did God harden his heart? Yes, but I believe he did so through the Word. The Word today does the same thing, depending on who it falls upon. Jesus illustrated that by the different soils. The wayside soil, the rocky ground, the thorny ground, and the good ground is the seed which is good. Same seed, same word. It falls on different hearts. And how it's received it has different effects too. The hard-hearted person just simply rejects it, okay, like the wayside soil. And I believe that's the case here with Pharaoh too. But it does say the Lord hardened his heart. So he did. How? I think through the word. That's my opinion on that. But, did God harden his heart for a purpose? Yes. It was definitely going to be that he's going to reject it. He's just going to harden his heart up against it. Well, my magicians were able to make snakes too. Yeah, but Aaron's snake ate your guys' snakes. What does that mean? Well, they can make more snakes. Yeah, and Aaron's rod will swallow those ones up too. God's the one that's in control. He's the one that's powerful. You need to hear what he has to say. All right, but he stiffened himself up, didn't he? He hardened his heart. And the Lord said unto Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hardened. He refuseth to let the people go. So just a reminder, just what he told Moses before. Remember, that was one of the excuses that Moses offered. Well, a couple of them are really included in that. He said, who am I to go to Pharaoh to ask him to let the people go or demand that of him? Who am I? Well, you're the one that I'm commanding. It's really me that's going to tell him. I'm using you as the mouthpiece. You're to go before Pharaoh. You're to tell him, okay? So the excuse that he offers, who am I? Or they will not believe me. Well, the Israelites would not believe either. They believed first, then they didn't believe when their oppression got hard, and God was patient with them. But Pharaoh was not going to believe him either, was he? God said, I know that. Doesn't matter. Go tell Pharaoh, let the people go. That's the command. It doesn't matter what the effect is. I know what the effect is. Let me handle that. You just do what I tell you to do. That's not always easy, is it? Not always easy. Not going to be well received. We don't like that. We don't like that. So God says, go and tell people. Preach the word. Go into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. Well, they're not all going to hear what we have to say. We're not going to be received with open arms. A lot of times we're going to be rejected, flat out rejected. We don't like that. That's not the point. The point is get the gospel out there, isn't it? So you get a door slammed in your face, oh well, move on. Move on. That's their choice. And, don't get angry with them. Have pity on them. And pray and hope that they'll be softened so that someday maybe they'll actually hear it. Maybe they'll listen. Let's hope. Now, it could get even worse than that. You could get attacked. You could be assaulted for it. You'd say, well, that's enough reason for me to not do it. Was it enough reason for Paul? He suffered a lot more than we do today. A lot more dangerous situations that we face today. All right, so there's no excuse for that. We still need to get the word out to people, let them know. So he says, get thee unto Pharaoh in the morning. He hardened his heart, Moses. He didn't listen to you. So what do I do? Okay, let's give up. No. In the morning, go to Pharaoh. Don't give up on him. Keep on pushing. Go in the morning. Don't wait. Don't give him any time. But in the morning go. Lo, he goeth out unto the water. And thou shalt stand by the river's brink against he come. And the rod which was turned into a serpent shalt thou take in thine hand. Good reminder. Remember this, Pharaoh? Remember this rod? This is the instrument that God has chosen to work through. And I'm the man that he's chosen to speak through. So you need to listen to his voice. Why did Pharaoh go to the river in the morning? Well, we do have a precedent for this. Pharaoh's daughter also went to the river for what reason in the morning? She went down there to bathe. Well, maybe that's why he went down. He maybe went down to bathe in the river. Maybe because, just like you probably did this morning, you probably got a shower this morning. All right, thank you very much. I'm glad you did. All right, and you're glad that I did, right? Okay, that's a good thing. And there's nothing of significance other than cleanliness, all right, and make us a little more pleasant around somebody else. And that might be all it was to it, or there may have been something more to it. It might have been some ritual that he performed. Remember what the Egyptians did in their worship? One of the things they worshiped was the Nile River itself. They blessed the Nile and praised the Nile because the Nile River provided the moisture along its banks to where people could irrigate crops, and people could plant crops and grow and have everything they needed to survive, okay, food-wise, all right? So it may be something, some kind of a ritual that he went through, some kind of a worship ritual. We don't know. It doesn't really say. But he went out early in the morning to the river, and Moses was to go and meet him there. And thou shalt say unto him, the Lord God of the Hebrews hath sent me unto thee, saying, let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. And behold, hitherto thou wouldest not hear. So far. Hitherto means so far. So far you've rejected me. But I'm not done, God is saying, through Moses. Thus saith the Lord, Moses says, in this thou shalt know that I am the Lord. Behold, I will smite with the rod that which is in my hand upon the rivers, or upon the waters which are in the river, and they shall be turned to blood. Okay. Now, a lot of people believe, and I've seen documentaries on this, that there were some clay mines that were upstream of the river that may have let go and turned the color of the water dark red color. All right. You think that's a good explanation for it? You know, I've seen red liquid, I've seen red paint, and I've seen red blood. Is there a difference? Look, touch, smell. You know what blood smells like, don't you? You know what blood smells like. You might even know what it tastes like. You know, you might have been like I was when I was a young man. We kind of got into it sometimes, and get a bloody lip. You know what it tastes like? Okay. Blood is a different kind of liquid, isn't it? There was no mistaking. They knew what it was. It wasn't just red dye in the river. You know, I think New York City, some of the other places around St. Patrick's Day dump a bunch of green dye in the river and make it green for St. Patrick's Day. Okay. So somebody dumps red dye in the river, and you see a red river. What are you going to think? Is it blood? Somebody dumped red dye in the river. That's all. It'll wash out. It'll be gone. Right? This is more than just red dye or red clay mines collapsing and falling into the river and turning it that way. This is the very first of the plagues. The alleged divinity of the Nile, Dehoff says, that Pharaoh was going out to pray at his morning devotions. Now, he took the position that this was a morning religious ritual that he was going through. Maybe he went through this every day, offering praise, worshiping the Nile River itself. How sad that sometimes men worship the creature more than the Creator himself. You know, instead of putting the devotion and admiration into the Nile River, how about the one who created it? How about worship the hand that created the Nile? You see, we got to be careful about that. It's good to go out into the woods and look around and see nature and marvel at God's creatures, right? That's fine. That's good. As a hunter, I marvel at the things that God's made. I marvel at how difficult they are sometimes to catch up to. Difficult it is to bring one home to put in the freezer or to put on the dinner plate. All right. As a hunter, you realize that. And you admire the creatures, but don't worship them. Worship the God who created them. You see, sometimes we get that backwards. We got to be careful with that. Okay, so the river was turned to blood. It was turned into blood. And the fish that is in the river shall die, and the river shall stink, and the Egyptians shall loathe to drink of the water of the river. Okay? Again, see, it's not just red dye. It's the stench of blood. They know what it is. And they don't want to drink it. They don't want to drink out of the river anymore. They were able to do so before, obviously. They were able to go down and get water from the river, and it was clean enough to do so. Okay, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying unto Aaron, take thy rod, stretch out thine hand upon the waters of Egypt, and upon their streams, upon their rivers, and upon their ponds, and upon all their pools of water, that they may become blood, and that there may be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in the vessels of wood and in the vessels of stone. So they weren't done with just raising their hand, perhaps with the rod. Some believe that Aaron took the rod and waved the rod over, maybe. Or maybe just held the rod up and took his hand over it. But whatever it was, however he did this, it was obvious that God was smiting the waters of Egypt. It was God that was causing this to happen through Moses and Aaron. Okay, do all of this, and even in the vessels of stone and in the vessels of wood, wherever they had water that was stored up for drinking, for consumption, for use, it would be turned into blood. Not just red liquid, but blood. It had the stench of blood. They understood what it was. They knew what it was. And Moses and Aaron did so as the Lord commanded, and he lifted up the rod and smote the waters that were in the river. Whether that's physically smote them with the rod or just held the rod, whichever it was, and God smote the rivers. Okay? In the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, and all the waters that were in the river were turned to blood. Turned to blood. The fish that was in the river died, and the river stank. The Egyptians could not drink of the water of the river, and there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. Okay, this is number one. There are 10 plagues that are going to take place. And you're going to see that each one of them is Jehovah God, the real God, the I Am, attacking one of the deities of Egypt. In this case, the Nile River. They worshiped the Nile. The Nile provided all their sustenance. Not now. There's somebody over the Nile. God has blessed Egypt with the Nile River. And instead of worshiping him, they worshiped the river. Well, that's going to stop, or at least they're going to be warned about their foolishness. But as usual, Satan always has a counter, doesn't he? The magicians of Egypt did so with their enchantments. They were able to produce blood out of a vessel. Or they were able to turn water into blood, or at least make it appear so. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened, neither did he hearken unto them, as the Lord had said. And Pharaoh turned and went into his house, neither did he set his heart to this also. He didn't let this affect him, just like the rod being cast down before him, which was a warning. This is an actual attack on Egypt by God himself, an attack on Pharaoh. And all the Egyptians digged round about the river for water to drink, for they could not drink the water of the river. They had to go get fresh water, because all the other vessels, all the water they'd stored up for drinking had been corrupted, had been changed into blood. And 7 days were fulfilled after that the Lord had smitten the river. A whole week, 7 full days, that the river was turned into blood. It'd be kind of difficult for that to be maintained. It would be an awful supply of red clay to turn that water red like that, and then to continue to keep it that way for a whole week. You'd think if that was washing down into the river like that, it would just wash through after a bit. But it wasn't something like red clay. It was something, this was the hand of God that was taking care of that. And in chapter 8, the Lord spake unto Moses, Go unto Pharaoh, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Let my people go, that they may serve me. God's not backing off an inch, is he? Let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. This is the same command every time. And if thou refuse to let them go, behold, I will smite all thy borders with frogs. Now, frogs are generally inoffensive creatures, aren't they? They don't bite. They don't. In fact, even the ones that do bite, you just got to laugh. All right. For frog, if you've ever had a frog latch down on your finger, I don't think I ever have actually, but I would just laugh. They don't have any teeth or anything like that. They can't hurt you. There's only one frog that I would be afraid to touch, and that's that poison arrow frog that they have down South America. Because if you touch him, he could kill you because he's got venom in his skin. It'll actually absorb it through your skin. In fact, the native people in that area used to take those frogs and rub their arrow tips on them and catch them with leaves and then rub their arrow tips on them. And then when they would shoot somebody, it would paralyze them. It would kill them, even if they just nicked them. That toxin would get into their system. Okay, but these frogs are just apparently normal frogs of some kind. Whatever they were, green frogs, tree frogs, bullfrogs, I don't know, maybe all different kinds of frogs. But the river shall bring forth frogs abundantly. It shall go up and come into thine house, into thy bedchamber, upon thy bed, into thy house, the house of thy servants, and upon thy people, and into thine ovens, and into thy kneading troughs. We don't realize just how effective this plague was. This is plague number 2. Okay, again, this might be a plague directed against the river, but the second plague of bringing the frogs up showed the absurdity of the worship of different things like amphibians and reptiles. They worshiped crocodiles, they worshiped the frogs, they worshiped all kinds of things like that, all kinds of different animals that they deified. Well, these frogs were not worthy of worship, were they? And they became a very extreme nuisance. The frogs came up upon all the people and upon all thy servants, verse 4. Can you imagine just how annoying this would be? Go to bed at night, blow out your lamp, crawl in, and there's frogs everywhere in your bed. That wouldn't feel very good, would it? So you don't sleep very well that night. The next morning you get up to bake some bread, and here's your kneading bowl and your flour, and it's filled up with frogs. Frogs are everywhere, okay? This would be annoying. This would be disgusting after a while, wouldn't it? Yeah, you could eat frog legs, I guess. Which the Egyptians would not do. That's interesting, isn't it? They wouldn't eat frog legs or alligator, or they wouldn't eat even cattle, because they considered those things to be worthy of worship. Those were, they would actually, as we're going to see, they'd actually cry over the death of an animal, but they would burn a man alive. And that wouldn't be a problem. They didn't have any problem with that. Okay, the Lord spake unto Moses, say unto Aaron, stretch forth thine hand with the rod over the streams, over the rivers, over the ponds, and cause the frogs to come up on the land of Egypt. And Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. They were everywhere. It wasn't just a few frogs. It wasn't just a lot of frogs. They were overwhelmed by them. That's how much power God has. You know, where did they come from? Well, he just simply multiplied them so that there were frogs coming out of everywhere. Everywhere you looked, there were frogs. And the magicians did so with their enchantments and brought frogs upon the land of Egypt. Okay, they were able, we can do that too. It's not a big deal. I don't think they made as many frogs as Moses and Aaron did through the power of God. But they were able to produce frogs somehow, either through deception or maybe even through some kind of power that they had, some kind of agreement they had with a demon type of power. I don't know. It doesn't say, but they were able to do such a thing. And Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, entreat the Lord, that he may take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go, that they may do sacrifice unto the Lord. There's a lie. It says, if you do this, if you take the frogs away, have God take those frogs out of the way, because they were an annoyance to Pharaoh, then I'll let the people go and serve God in the wilderness, just like he asked to do. Okay? And Moses said unto Pharaoh, glory over me, In other words, he was very thankful that Pharaoh was saying such a thing. When shall I entreat for thee? When do you want me to pray for you? When do you want this plague lifted? And for thy servants and for thy people to destroy the frogs from thee and thy houses, that they may remain in the river only. I've always wondered about this next verse. And he said, tomorrow. That's okay. I'm kind of getting used to sleeping with these frogs. I always wondered, why not right now? Why not right now? But no, he says tomorrow. And it's good because God's going to do exactly what Moses is intending to do. Moses is trying to say, when do you want me to entreat for you? And when Moses entreats, what happens to the frogs? They all die. Okay, so they're not around anymore. So they of course, they've got to get rid of them. That's another part of the problem, a part of this plague. And he said, be it according to thy word, that thou mayest know that there is none like unto the Lord our God, so that you can know. Kind of reminded of that fellow that came to Jesus, and he said, you don't have to come to my house, but he said, Jesus said he would heal his servant, and he did. And on his way back, his servants met him and said that he's doing okay. And he said, at what hour did he start doing well? And they told him. And it was the same hour he'd been talking with Jesus. So he knew, that Jesus had healed him. Same thing as with these frogs. Pharaoh had to know. This was the time he requested, tomorrow, when it comes a new day, then you can pray that the frogs will be removed. And Moses did so, and that's exactly what happened. All right. That the frogs shall depart from thee, from thy houses, and from thy servants, from thy people, and they shall remain in the river only. Apparently the Nile was full of frogs, but that's fine. That's where frogs are supposed to be. Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh. Moses cried unto the Lord because of the frogs which he had brought against Pharaoh, and the Lord did according to the word of Moses, and the frogs died out of the houses and out of the villages and out of the fields. So no longer are the frogs a problem. I kind of wonder if they didn't come out of the river because of the blood. Might have been. Might have been that God used that first plague to drive the frogs out of the river, and that made the second plague. God, of course, knowing that Pharaoh was not going to listen. All right? And they gathered them together upon heaps, and the land stank. It's not very, very pleasant place to be in Egypt now, is it? It stank because of the blood. Now it stinks because of the frogs, the dead frogs that are gathered into heaps. But when Pharaoh saw that there was respite, in other words, there was some relief from this plague, he hardened his heart and hearkened not unto them as the Lord had said. So he lied to Moses. When Moses, he entreated him to take away the frogs. He said, if you take the frogs away, I'll let your people go and serve God in the wilderness. But he was willing to say anything just to get that done. And once it was done, he changed his mind. Or he lied. He lied to him. Lied to Moses. He lied to Aaron. He lied to God. And God never believed him in the first place. He knew his heart would be hard. And the Lord said unto Moses, say unto Aaron, stretch out thy rod and smite the dust of the land, that it may become lice. Now, that would be bad. The English Standard Version translates it gnats. Either one. Okay. Some kind of a biting thing, because that's what the word originally means. It comes from the word kain, which means to attach to something. So it may be a lice. Singular is louse, all right? Lice is the plural form of it. And the reason that we hear it in lice all the time is because they come in numbers, not just one at a time. But they bite. They attach themselves. They're a parasite. Same thing's true of a gnat, too. So if it's a biting kind of a gnat, that could be an annoying thing as well, a painful thing. And even maybe disease could be spread that way as well. All right, so whatever they were, lice or gnats, some kind of a biting thing that came upon them and throughout all the land of Egypt. And they did so, for Aaron stretched out his hand with the rod and smote the dust of the earth, and it became lice in man and in beast, and the dust of the land became lice throughout all the land of Egypt. The interesting thing about plague number 3, okay, go back and as we look at what Dehoff has to say, it seems to have been a blow at the entire system of idolatrous worship. The Egyptians utterly abhorred all kinds of vermin, anything that like a parasitical thing, a leech, lice, gnats, mosquitoes. They didn't like those. They didn't like mice. They didn't like rats. They considered them to be something that was to be avoided and was not to be considered very desirable at all. That's interesting. But you know what else is interesting about the third plague? Look at verse 18. The magicians did so with their enchantments to bring forth lice, but they could not. They couldn't produce lice out of the dust. They weren't able to do this. They were able to produce snakes out of their rods. They were able to produce blood out of water. And they were able to produce frogs. Somehow or another, they couldn't produce the lice or the gnats, whatever they were. Okay? So there were lice upon man and upon beasts. And the magician said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." Did they get it? They did, didn't they? We can't do this. This isn't a trick. We can't reproduce this. And so they give advice to Pharaoh. This is the finger of God. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he hearkened not unto them as the Lord had said. Wow, that's a thick skull. All right, I can be a little dense sometimes, but Pharaoh, my, oh my. You know, the water, the blood, the frogs, and now the lice are all over the land, and the magicians can't reproduce that. And they're telling him, you better listen to these men. We can't do this. This is the finger of God. You better hear what they're saying. It's going to get worse, isn't it? And it is. Each of these plagues is going to get worse and worse and worse until finally Pharaoh relents. It's going to take all of this. Moses, remember back in the beginning, his solution when he saw an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Hebrew, he looked to the right, he looked to the left, didn't see anybody, so he killed the Egyptian. If he could have caused an uprising and got enough men together to try to defeat Pharaoh, he would have failed. Killing the Egyptians one man at a time was not going to free the Israelites. And God said it will not be by a mighty hand. Israel will be free, but not by a mighty hand, not by a man's hand, not by a charismatic leader of men. It's going to have to come through the Almighty. It's going to have to be me. I'm going to have to be the one who delivers the children of Israel from Egypt. That's the important thing to remember. It's going to take all 10 of these plagues before finally Pharaoh's going to let them go. And then it's not over yet. There's still more that has to be done. Okay? We are out of time. Lord willing, we'll pick up there in our study on Wednesday evening.